The sky above the United Earth Hall was bright and clear. The tall silver towers of the capital city reflected the light like calm water. It was a peaceful morning, but everyone inside the Great Hall could feel the weight of something heavy. A group of alien envoys stood at the center of the chamber. Their robes were torn, and their faces carried the marks of fear. They were from the planet Leora, a world far beyond the rim of Earth's oldest star maps. The leader of the envoy was called Renat. His hands were shaking as he looked at the wide hall filled with humans in clean uniforms. The United Earth Council sat on a high platform, watching silently. Renat had traveled across half the galaxy with only one hope left. He stepped forward, bowed his head, and spoke in a trembling but clear voice. "We ask for mercy. We have no army left. We have no ships to run. The Drackle will burn our world. Please help us." The room stayed silent for a moment. Only the sound of the soft wind passing through the hall could be heard. The Drackle were not unknown to Earth. Stories about them had passed through trade routes and military reports for years. They were a war faction feared by many worlds. When they set their eyes on a target, no planet had ever resisted. Most surrendered and paid tribute. Those who refused were erased from the stars. The council members exchanged quiet looks. Some were moved by Renat's words. Others were cold. Earth had fought its own wars in the past. The council had learned not to step into every fight in the galaxy. But there was something different about this plea. At the edge of the hall, a tall man in a black uniform leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. His name was Commander Rion. He was not a politician. He was a soldier who had led human forces in the last Outer Belt War. He had seen worlds fall and rise again. He watched Ronat carefully, not with pity, but with understanding. Ronat lowered himself to his knees on the smooth floor. His people behind him followed. Their eyes were full of pain. The journey had cost them much. Their home was already surrounded. "Mercy is all we have left," Ronat whispered. One of the counselors, a woman named Ellen, stood and spoke. Her voice was calm. "We are sorry for your suffering. Earth has many responsibilities. We cannot risk the lives of our people for every conflict beyond our borders. Why would the Drackle target your world?" Renat raised his head. His voice shook, but he did not break. "They want our sky mines. They want the blue crystals that grow in our mountains. We had no army. We had no defense fleet. We tried to pay. It was not enough. They took our ships. They burned our towns. They will end us soon." Ellen looked away. She had heard similar stories before. Another counselor, Tomas, spoke in a sharper tone. "If Earth fights the Drackle, it will not be a small war. They will answer with fire. Are you asking us to risk billions of lives for your planet?" Renat did not try to argue. He simply bowed lower. "We have no one else to ask." The silence that followed felt like a storm waiting to fall. Rion pushed away from the wall and stepped forward. The sound of his boots echoed in the chamber. Every eye turned to him. He was not a counselor, but his voice carried weight among them. "I have fought enemies like the Drackle," Rion said. "I know what happens when they win. They do not stop with one planet. They move to the next, and the next. They do not understand mercy. They understand power. If we wait, it will not end with Leora. It will come to us." Tomas frowned. "Are you suggesting we go to war?" Rion's eyes stayed cold and focused. "I am suggesting we remember who we are. Earth rose from ashes because we learned to fight when no one else would stand. We are not sending weak hands. We are sending warriors." The council began to murmur among themselves. Some supported him. Others feared the cost. Renat looked up at Rian with wide eyes. For the first time in many weeks, there was a spark of hope. Outside the hall, the streets of the capital were filled with citizens watching the broadcast on large screens. Some felt sympathy for the aliens. Others feared another long war. Old scars of past battles still ran deep in human memory. Ellen spoke again. "We need time to decide. The Drackle are not a small raiding group. If we move against them, they will know we stand against their empire." Rion answered simply, Then they will learn what happens when Earth stands. The council called a short break to deliberate. Renat and his people were taken to a waiting room. It was clean, warm, and safe. For a brief moment, they felt something they had not felt in a long time. They felt that someone was listening. Renat looked at one of his companions, a young woman named Laren. Her face was pale from exhaustion. "Do you think they will help us?" she asked softly. Renat did not answer right away. He thought of the burned fields of their home, of the sky mines now crawling with Dracal troops, and of the children hidden in the caves beneath the capital. "I do not know," Renat finally said, "but I saw something in that soldier's eyes. It was not mercy. It was fire." Meanwhile, inside the council chamber, the debate grew heated. Tomas continued to push for caution. "Earth is not the galaxy's shield," he said. "We cannot rush into a war that will spread across the stars. We must protect our own." Ellen countered, "If the Dracal take Leora, they will grow stronger. If we stand aside, it may be our world they come for next." One by one, counselors shared their views. Some spoke with fear. Others spoke with pride. But through all the voices, one truth stood strong. Humanity had never been the kind to bow quietly when darkness spread. Outside the chamber, Rian stood by the great window overlooking the city. He remembered the faces of the worlds he had seen fall. He remembered standing on broken ground, knowing help had never come for them. He clenched his hand into a fist. If the council refused, he would find another way. A soft chime echoed through the hall. The council had reached a decision. They returned to their seats. The doors opened, and Renat and his people were brought back in. The great hall was silent once again. Ellen spoke for the council. Her voice was steady. "The United Earth Council recognizes the threat the Dracal pose to your world. We cannot promise the full force of our fleets, but we will not stand aside. A strike force will be sent to Leora. You will not face them alone." Renat fell to his knees again, but this time it was not out of despair. His voice shook as he whispered his thanks. His people lowered their heads, their hope renewed. Rian stepped closer. His expression did not change, but his presence filled the hall with something sharp and unshakable. "We will not give mercy to those who bring war," Rian said. "We will give them a reason to fear the sky." Across the city, the news spread fast. The Vanguard fleet was being called. Warships that had been silent for years powered up again. Engines roared. Hangars opened. The old warriors began to move. In a quiet corner of the city, an old veteran watched the news feed. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "Earth stands again." Far above, in the cold silence of space, the stars shone the same way they always had. But something in the galaxy had shifted. A sleeping power had begun to wake. The Dracal would soon learn that not every plea for mercy ends with weakness. On this day, the first steps of war were taken, not by conquerors, not by tyrants, but by warriors who remembered what it meant to stand when no one else would. The first rays of light touched the steel walls of Earth's main spaceport. Engines roared across the giant hangars as the Vanguard fleet came to life. Massive warships that had rested in silence for years began to rise from their platforms. The sound was like thunder rolling over the city. "Commander." Rian walked through the docking bay with his coat flowing behind him. Technicians ran around the ships, locking cargo holds, checking power cells, and securing supply crates. Soldiers stood in neat lines, their faces calm but focused. The air smelled of metal, oil, and readiness. The flagship was called Iron Star. It was an old battlecruiser that had fought in the Outer Belt War. Its hull still carried scars from past battles. Rian had led many missions on it, and it had never failed him. As he looked at the ship, a quiet memory returned. He saw the faces of those who had fought beside him and did not return. He shook off the thought, and climbed the ramp to the command deck. Inside, bright screens lit the room, and officers moved in a steady rhythm. They knew what was coming. The mission had been approved only hours ago. There was no long speech, no parade. Only movement. Lieutenant Nira stood beside the main console. She was young, but her hands did not shake. She saluted as Rian entered. "All ships are fueling, sir. The fleet will be ready to launch in 6 hours," she reported. Rian nodded. "Good. Make sure every pilot understands this is not a drill. We are not going to scare anyone. We are going to fight." "Yes, sir." In the distance, 3 more ships hovered in formation. These were the support carriers, loaded with medical crews, supply units, and mobile shelters. Behind them, a squadron of fast interceptors lined up for deployment. Earth was not sending a ceremonial team. It was sending warriors, while preparations continued. Reynat and his people were brought to the Iron Star. They were given clean clothes and a small cabin. For the first time in many weeks, they ate warm food and slept on soft beds. Renat walked through the corridors with quiet awe. Humans moved with such order. Every person seemed to know exactly what to do. It was a kind of strength he had not seen in his own world. Rian met Renat in the observation room. The wall was made of clear, reinforced glass. From here, the whole fleet could be seen preparing to launch. Renat spoke first. "Your people are fast. I did not expect this." Rian kept his eyes on the ships. "Earth has learned that hesitation costs lives. We do not wait for storms to arrive. We move toward them." Renat lowered his head. "I know what the Drackle will bring. I hope your fleet can stand against them." Rian turned to face him. His voice stayed calm but carried weight. "We have faced worse. We do not underestimate them. But they will learn something they have not faced before." Renat saw no fear in Rian's eyes. It was the look of someone who had walked through a war and returned. It was not empty pride. It was quiet certainty. Meanwhile, in the council chamber far below, Tomas watched the launch preparation through a live feed. He still carried doubts. The Drackle were not a small power. Their fleets were known for crushing resistance fast. But the decision had been made. Earth was stepping into the fire. Ellen entered the room and stood beside him. "You still do not trust this mission," she said softly. Tomas sighed. "I trust our soldiers. I do not trust war. It never ends where it starts." Ellen looked at the screen. Sometimes it is not about where it ends. It is about who stands at the end. As the sun climbed higher, the fleet's engines glowed. Final checks finished. Crew members strapped into their stations. Pilots sealed their helmets. The Iron Star's Captain Orcs stood on the bridge. He had served under Rian for years and had seen him make decisions that others would not dare. "All systems green," Orcs said. "Ready to depart on your order, Commander?" Rian stepped to the center of the bridge. "The main display showed the stars ahead, then we fly," Rian said. The engines ignited. One by one, the ships lifted from the platform. The ground beneath shook as the Iron Star rose into the sky. Crowds gathered outside the spaceport to watch. Children waved flags. Old veterans stood in silence, remembering the days when they too had launched into the unknown. As the fleet broke through the atmosphere, the blue sky turned into a sea of blackened stars. The Earth shrank behind them, calm and bright. Ahead lay the long road to Leora. The journey would take weeks, even with the fastest jump drives. The fleet moved in formation, cutting through the darkness like a spear. During the first days of travel, the soldiers trained. They marched through the long corridors, checked their weapons, and reviewed maps of Leora. They studied the Drackle fleet formations, known attack patterns, and landing zones. Rian spent his time reading every report about the Drackle. They were not just raiders. They were organized, brutal, and confident. They believed no one could stop them. That was why they had to be shown they were wrong. Renat was allowed to join strategy meetings. His knowledge of the land and cities was valuable. He drew maps, explained the layout of the capital, pointed out the old defense stations. "This is the North Ridge," Renat explained, pointing to a tall peak on the map. "If they hold this line, they can control the entire city below. It was once a mining area, but they turned it into a strong point." Rian studied the map carefully. "Then that is where we will break them first. If the ridge falls, their control cracks." Renat's hand trembled slightly as he placed a marker on the capital city. "Most of our people are here. Many are hiding underground. The Drackle patrol the surface day and night." Lieutenant Nira added. We will need to land fast and hit hard before they can regroup. Surprise will be our strongest ally, Rian agreed. They will expect negotiation. We will give them a storm. Renat looked at him with both fear and hope. The humans did not speak like politicians. They spoke like fighters in the training bay. Young soldiers practiced with their drop gear. They would be the first to land when the battle began. One soldier named Rano adjusted his straps and looked at his partner. You think the Drackle are really that strong? He asked his partner. A tall woman named Mira smirked. Strong or not, they bleed like anyone else. And we are not going to let them touch another world. The atmosphere on the ship was sharp. There was no cheer, no false promises, only preparation. As the days passed, Renat began to understand something about humans. They did not fight because they loved war. They fought because they refused to let fear decide their future. That was what made them dangerous to those who thought them weak. On the 10th day of travel, Fleet reached the first jump point. The stars stretched into thin lines as the ships entered the jump corridor. Inside the ship, the crew felt the slight pull of the shift but stayed steady. When they emerged, a new star system stretched before them. The CUM station beeped. Lieutenant Nira looked up. Sir, we are receiving a long-range scan from Leora. The Drackle fleet is still in orbit. No sign of withdrawal. Rian leaned over the display. Red markers surrounded the planet like claws. The enemy fleet was large. It was not a raiding force. It was a full occupation. Eric's voice was firm. They are not expecting anyone to come for Leora? Rian's eyes narrowed. Then it is time to remind them that Earth still stands. Back on Leora, the situation was growing worse. The Drackle commander had ordered more troops to secure the mines. The sky was covered with heavy patrol ships. Civilians hid in tunnels and basements. Every day they hoped someone would come. Every day the enemy grew bolder, luring. The young woman who had traveled with Renat had family still trapped on the planet. She sat by the viewing glass and stared into the stars. Rian walked in quietly and stood beside her. You will see them again, he said. She looked up at him. How can you be sure? Rian answered without looking away from the stars. Because we have not come to lose. The fleet continued its silent journey. Small repair bots moved along the hull of the ships, checking for damage. Inside, soldiers cleaned their weapons and adjusted their armor. Medical crews prepared emergency bays. Engineers checked shield systems again and again. Everyone had a role. Everyone carried a part of the mission. As the second jump point neared, Rian called a meeting with all unit leaders. The room filled with officers, pilots, and ground commanders. We are not just fighting for Leora, Rian began. We are fighting to show the Drackle that the galaxy is not theirs to take. When we land, we do not wait for their first move. We strike, we hold the line. We give them fear. The officers listened carefully. They knew what it meant to follow Rian. His plans were bold. He never gave easy orders. Some of you have fought with me before, Rian continued. You know what happens when we face those who think they are unstoppable? We break them. We will do it again. The room filled with a quiet strength. No one cheered. No one shouted. But the air itself felt heavier. Later that night, Renat walked alone through the ship. He stopped by a large window and looked at the stars moving slowly past. His world had called for mercy. What it received instead was something he had not expected. It received warriors who carried their fire like a shield. For the first time since the invasion, he began to believe his home might survive. Deep inside the command deck, Rian stood with Arik and Nira. The map of Leora floated before them, Arik said. Once we reach the system, we will not have much time to position before they detect us. Rian nodded. Then we will not hide. We will strike with everything at once. Hit the ridge. The stars stretched thin as the fleet came out of the jump corridor. The darkness of space returned, cold and wide. The blue and green world of Leora floated in the distance. From here it looked calm and peaceful, but the warships surrounding it told a different story. The Drackle fleet formed a hard shell around the planet. Their dark hulls reflected no light. Their ships were silent, patient, and ready to crush anything that approached. The Iron Star took the front of the formation. Rian stood on the bridge as the main screen filled with the image of Leora and the enemy fleet. There were more ships than the reports had said. Heavy cruisers, patrol ships, and transports hung above the planet like a wall of iron. It was a display of power meant to break hope before the first shot. "Captain," Orcs stood beside Rian. His voice was steady. "We are reading 30 enemy warships. 10 heavy, the rest mixed classes. Shields are active. No sign they have detected us yet." Rian kept his eyes on the screen. "They think no one would come for this world. That will be their mistake." Lieutenant Nira called out from her console. "Fleet holding position. All ships reporting ready. Drop units on standby. Orbital strike teams in launch tubes." No malfunctions reported. Renat stood near the rear of the bridge. His hands were clenched. He saw his homeworld far ahead. He could almost picture the mountains, the cities, the crystal mines, and the people hiding underground. For the first time since they fled, the Drackle would not be alone in the sky. Rian gave a short command. "Bring us closer. Slow and quiet. Make them see us when we want them to see us." The engines of the Iron Star burned softly. One by one, the human fleet moved forward in a silent wave. The darkness of space was their cover. The Drackle still did not react. Their guard was down because they had already decided no one would dare in the lower decks. Soldiers stood ready in the drop bays. They wore dark armor with the silver emblem of Earth on their shoulders. Their weapons hung by their sides. The air smelled of steel and fuel. It was not fear that filled the room. It was focus. Mira checked the straps on her drop harness. Her voice was calm as she spoke to Rano. "When the door opens, do not think about the ground. Focus on the target. Trust your training." Rano nodded. "I am ready." Above them, the launch tubes opened. Hundreds of drop pods lined up, waiting for the signal. On the bridge, Nira spoke again. "Enemy fleet now has us on scan. They are reacting. Formations shifting." The Drackle fleet came alive. Ships rotated to face the incoming humans. Energy signatures lit up across their hulls. They were preparing to fire. Rian raised his hand slowly. "Hold position." Arik glanced at him. "They are charging weapons." Rian's voice stayed steady. "Let them see us. Let them understand what is coming." The largest Drackle cruiser sent out a transmission. It was short and cold. "This world belongs to the Drackle. Leave or be destroyed." Rian gave his first order. "Answer them with fire." The Iron Star opened its forward batteries. Blue light cut through the darkness. The first blast slammed into a Drackle patrol ship, splitting its hull apart in a single strike. In that instant, silence was gone. The battle began. The human fleet moved in perfect formation. Heavy cruisers locked on targets. Missile bays opened. The black sky exploded with light. Drackle ships answered at once, throwing fire back toward the humans. The stars between the two fleets turned into a storm of burning trails. Inside the drop bay, the floor shook with each strike. The soldiers held their lines. The lights above turned red. A voice echoed through the speakers. "Prepare for drop." Mira gripped the side of her pod. Rano checked his weapon again. The sound of the battle grew louder as the doors began to open. Rian watched the enemy formation shift. Target their relay cruiser. Break their command link. Mira nodded. Locking weapons. The Iron Star focused its forward guns on a large Drackle ship near the center. A storm of fire followed. The enemy cruiser cracked and burned. The Drackle formation faltered for a brief moment. That was the signal Rian had been waiting for. "Launch drop teams," he ordered. The lower decks roared to life. Drop pods shot out from the launch tubes like metal rain. They streaked toward Leora's atmosphere in perfect lines. Each pod carried a unit of soldiers ready to fight. Mira felt the rush of gravity press against her chest. The pod shook as it cut through the air. Fire burned outside the small window. She took a deep breath and focused. Above the planet, the battle raged. Earth's fleet moved with a speed the Drakal had not expected. They were used to slow targets and easy victories. This time, the sky itself fought back. Arik reported. 2 enemy ships down. 3 more damaged. Our shields holding. We lost 1 interceptor wing, Rian answered. Keep pressure on their flank. Do not let them regroup. Renat watched the display. He saw the Iron Star burn a path through the enemy. For years, the Drakal had made his people kneel. Now they were the ones falling. The drop pods broke through the clouds of Leora. The world below came into view. The once beautiful capital city was covered with black smoke. Drakal patrol towers dotted the streets. Old crystal mines were now enemy strongholds. Myra's pod slammed into the ground near the ridgeline. The doors burst open. She jumped out with her unit, taking position behind broken walls. Rano followed close behind. All around, other pods landed. Soldiers moved fast, setting up perimeter points. The first battle on the ground had begun. Drakal ground forces rushed to respond. Their patrol vehicles turned their guns toward the landing zones. But the humans were faster. Mira's unit opened fire with steady precision. Patrol vehicles went up in flames. From orbit, Rian's voice came through the cum. Hold the ridge. Reinforcements inbound. We cut their fleet. Now we break their hold on the ground, Mira answered. Ridge secured. Enemy resistance light, but increasing. The second wave of drop pods hit another zone near the city center. A unit under Commander Velen moved toward the old defense station. They had to secure the control hub before the enemy could jam communications. Velen gave sharp orders. Push forward. Clear the path. We take the station and open the gate. On the bridge of the Iron Star, Nira kept reporting positions. Ground units moving. Ridge line secured. Station assault in progress. Enemy forces regrouping near the mines. Rian studied the map. Then that is where they will try to strike hardest. Send armored walkers to the mine approach. Do not let them break our line. The Iron Star released heavy transports carrying armored walkers. These large machines landed near the ridge, their feet shaking the ground. They moved forward like steel giants, covering the soldiers. The Drakal commander, aboard a dark flagship, saw his easy victory vanish. He shouted orders to regroup and crush the humans on the ground. Waves of enemy troops moved toward the ridge. Their gunships dove from the sky. Mira saw them coming. Incoming gunships. We need support, Rian responded, without delay. Support coming in hot. Hold your ground. 2 human interceptors broke through the clouds and attacked the enemy gunships from behind. Explosions lit the air. The ridge held. Velen's unit reached the defense station and stormed through the outer wall. They fought their way to the control room and cut the enemy's signal jammers. The human fleet above received full communication again. Station secure, Velen reported. Nira turned to Rian, all units linked. Coordination restored. Rian gave the next command. Then it is time to take the capital. Renat stood silently as he watched everything unfold. His world was still burning, but now the fire was different. It was no longer the fire of the enemy. It was the fire of resistance. On the ground, Mira's unit pushed down the ridge toward the city. They moved street by street, clearing buildings and taking positions. Leora's underground civilians watched from hidden shelters. They saw soldiers with Earth's emblem marching through the streets. One child whispered to his mother, "They came." In the command center, the Drakal commander gave the order to fall back to the inner city. He had not expected this kind of fight. Earth's arrival had shattered his control. Rian saw the shift on the battle map. They are pulling back. They know they cannot win in the open, Eric nodded. They will try to hold the capital as long as they can. Wine's eyes narrowed. Then that is where we will end them. The Iron Star moved closer to the planet. Its shadow fell over the enemy positions. The human fleet formed a protective shell around the world. The Drakal tried to regroup their remaining ships, but Earth's guns cut them down. On the ground, Mira's unit reached the outer wall of the capital. Explosions shook the buildings. She turned to Rano. We hold here until the others join us. This city will not belong to them anymore. Above the planet, the human fleet completed its formation. The Dracal ships that had ruled the orbit were now scattered. Earth's voice filled the sky through open channels. It was Rian. This is Commander Rian of the United Earth Fleet. Leora stands no longer alone. The Dracal will leave, or they will fall. Across the battle, human soldiers heard his voice. Civilians in the shelters heard it too. It spread like a spark. Velen's unit moved from the defense station to the main road. Armored walkers followed. Gunfire echoed through the broken streets. Enemy resistance grew desperate, but weaker. The Dracal commander tried to rally his troops. His voice was harsh but thin. Fear had reached even his soldiers. They had never faced a force like this. The burning sky above Leora was filled with the sound of engines. The Vanguard fleet had broken through the Dracal blockade, but the real battle had only begun. Heavy smoke covered parts of the city as the enemy pushed from the east. Human soldiers and Leoran defenders worked side by side in the streets. Turning every block into a wall of resistance, Commander Rian stood near the front line. Dust covered his armor, but his eyes stayed sharp. Around him, soldiers carried wounded to the medical tents, while engineers set up heavy cannons at the corners of buildings. The air smelled of fuel and scorched metal. He held a small map display in his hand. The Dracal were advancing faster than expected. Their troops moved like a storm. The central power station had already fallen. If the Dracal reached the river bridge, they would cut the city in half. Captain Lena rushed toward him. She was one of the most experienced officers in the Vanguard. Her face was tired, but her voice remained steady. "They are pushing hard on the east flank," Lena reported. "We have only 3 defense units there. If they fall, the Dracal will take the bridge in minutes." Rian nodded slowly. He could hear distant thunder from the east. It was the sound of heavy Dracal cannons striking the outer walls. "Tell Unit 7 to hold," Rian said. "We will not give them that bridge." Lena frowned. "They are outnumbered. If we do not send support, they may not survive." Rian turned his head toward the sky. A human dropship flew past, leaving a trail of fire behind it. He clenched his hand around the map display. "We send everything we have," he said firmly. Within minutes, armored transports moved through the narrow streets. Soldiers rode on top of them, gripping their weapons. Leoran volunteers followed, carrying crates of energy cells and spare parts. They were farmers and miners only weeks ago. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder with trained warriors. At the eastern wall, the battle had already reached its peak. Dracal ground troops advanced with their black armored vehicles, firing streams of burning energy. The ground shook with each blast. Human soldiers crouched behind broken buildings, returning fire with precision. Sergeant Darrow, a young but fierce fighter, stood on the remains of a collapsed transport and shouted to his squad, "Hold the line. Do not let them pass." His words cut through the noise. He aimed his cannon and fired into the advancing enemy line. A Dracal vehicle exploded, lighting the area with a blinding flash. More Dracal troops marched forward. Their discipline was ruthless. They did not stop to recover the fallen. They moved like a single living machine. Rian arrived with reinforcements just as the wall began to crack. He jumped off the transport and ran through falling debris. "Form the shield wall," he commanded. Human soldiers locked their portable energy shields together, creating a glowing barrier. Leoran fighters hid behind them and aimed their rifles. The Dracal fire crashed against the barrier like a wave against stone. Lena appeared beside Rian with her unit. She handed him a cum unit. "Command says enemy warships are moving closer to the atmosphere," she said. "If they land heavy units, this line will fall." Rian's voice remained calm. "Then we hold them here until the last breath." The ground battle grew louder. Every street echoed with the sound of weapons and shouting. Smoke filled the air, but the human line did not break. Renat watched the battle from a command post not far behind. He could not fight like the soldiers, but he had a duty to guide his people. He ordered Leoran supply teams to keep the defenders armed and ready. For every crate that was carried to the front, another volunteer followed. Laren. The young woman from the envoy ran between the defense lines with a pack of medical gear. She helped wounded soldiers and kept moving. Her hands shook, but she never stopped. She saw the fear in the eyes of her people, but she also saw something stronger. She saw courage burning like fire in the rain. At the same time, in orbit above the planet, the Vanguard fleet faced a new challenge. Dracul carriers had arrived in formation. Their massive hulls blocked out the stars. Admiral Kara, commander of the Vanguard fleet, stood on the bridge of her flagship. Her officers gave fast reports. Enemy carriers are releasing dropships. One officer shouted. Kara gave her order without hesitation. Bring all forward guns online. Keep the line tight. We cannot let them reach the ground. The dark space between the fleets lit up as cannons opened fire. Beams of light crossed the void like burning arrows. Dracul ships responded with equal strength. Down below, the eastern wall trembled. Rian knew the enemy above would soon send reinforcements. Lena Rian said, "Get me fire support from orbit. We need to hold this ground until the fleet can push them back." Lena contacted command through the CUM unit. Moments later, a roar filled the sky as a human strike ship entered low orbit. Precision bombardment rained down on the Dracul formation beyond the wall. The explosions lit the night like a new sun. The Dracul advance slowed. Some of their vehicles burned in the streets. Human and Leoran soldiers cheered, but Rian did not relax. He knew this was only the beginning. A wave of new Dracul troops landed on the outskirts. Heavy walkers began moving toward the city. Their metal legs crushed everything in their path. Rian looked at Lena. Prepare the last line of explosives. She nodded and rushed to the engineers. Beneath the bridge, a team of sappers worked quickly. They set charges in the pillars, preparing for a desperate move. If the Dracul reached the bridge, they would blow it to stop their march. It would cut off the eastern side of the city, but it would also keep the enemy from breaking through. The minutes passed like hours. The Dracul pushed harder. Their walkers fired heavy rounds that shook the ground. The shield wall began to weaken. Rian moved forward to the front of the line. He stood in the open, his armor scratched and covered in dust. He raised his weapon and shouted, "Hold your ground. We are the shield. We are the wall. Earth stands here." His voice carried through the battlefield. Tired soldiers lifted their weapons again. Leoran volunteers stood taller. The Dracul fired everything they had. But the defenders answered with fire that did not stop. Laren crawled through the rubble to reach a wounded soldier. She dragged him back behind the shield wall. She had never thought she would stand in the middle of a war like this, but she felt no fear now. She felt part of something greater. Renat watched the line from the command post. His heart pounded as he saw the bridge shaking under the heavy fire. Then the first Dracul walker reached the bridge. Its legs dug into the steel as it stepped forward. Rian gave the signal. The explosives detonated with a thunderous sound. The bridge cracked like a bone under pressure and collapsed into the river below. The walker went down with it, followed by several enemy units. Water and fire rose into the air in a single massive wave. The defenders cheered. The Dracul advance on the east flank was stopped. Rian lowered his weapons slowly. His face remained hard, but there was a spark of fierce pride in his eyes. Lena approached him with dust covering her face. "The line held," she said, breathing heavily. Rian nodded. "Yes, it did, and it will again." The soldiers began to regroup. Engineers moved to set new defenses. The sky above still burned, but the ground below had not been taken. At night, the city grew quiet for a short moment. Fires still burned in the distance, but the enemy had been pushed back from the eastern side. Leoran children hidden in the caves heard the distant cheers. For the first time in many nights, they felt a small light of hope. Rian walked through the ruined streets, checking on every unit. He spoke little, but every soldier who saw him stood straighter. To them, he was not just a commander. He was the wall between them and the darkness. Renat found him near the collapsed bridge. "You saved the city," Renat said softly. Rian shook his head. "No, we held a line. The war is not over." Renat looked at the fallen bridge. then at the distant lights of the enemy camps beyond the river. "But you showed them something they will not forget." Rian did not answer. He stared at the horizon where the Drackle still waited. In orbit, Admiral Kara's fleet remained locked in battle. Neither side had won, but the enemy had been forced to slow their advance. The planet still stood. The night wind blew across the ruined city. Soldiers slept where they could. Medics worked under dim lights. Volunteers carried food and water to the front. Everyone knew another wave would come. But now the Drackle knew something they had not understood before. Leora was no longer a weak world. Earth had come, and Earth did not break. The night sky above Leora glowed with the dim red of burning wreckage. The bridge was gone, and the Drackle advance on the east flank had been stopped. But no one in the city thought the war was finished. Everyone could feel it in the air. The real storm had not yet begun. Commander Rian stood on the highest wall of the defense line. The city below him was scarred, but still alive. The smell of smoke and iron filled the air. He listened to the reports coming through his comm unit. "Enemy ships still in orbit," one voice said. "Drackle forces regrouping outside the eastern ruins." Another added. Lena walked up beside him, her armor scratched and dented from the last battle. She stared out at the dark horizon, where faint shapes of enemy machines moved in the distance. "They are gathering again," Lena said quietly. Rian nodded slowly. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Yes, this time they will throw everything they have." The Drackle were not known for retreating. When they suffered a setback, they returned with overwhelming force. Rian knew that the next attack would decide the future of Leora. If the line fell, the city would burn. If it held, the Drackle would lose their grip. In the underground command center, Renat stood before a large map table. Leorin and human officers surrounded him. They marked enemy positions with red lines and defense lines with blue. Every corner of the map was filled with danger. "Their main force is coming from the south now," an officer reported. "They will strike at the center of the city." Renat clenched his fists. "We do not have enough defense units there." Another officer turned to him. "The Vanguard fleet is preparing a final strike from orbit. If we can hold the line long enough, they will hit the Draco carriers directly." Renat took a deep breath. "Then we must give them the time they need." On the front line, soldiers moved quickly. Engineers reinforced barricades with steel plates. Heavy cannons were rolled into position. Portable shield towers were raised, forming a glowing barrier along the streets. Leorin volunteers carried ammunition and food to the fighters. Leorin moved among the soldiers with her medical team. Her hands were tired and her uniform stained with dust, but her eyes were calm. She tied bandages around wounded soldiers, whispered to frightened volunteers, and made sure no one felt alone. She had changed from the frightened envoy she once was. Now, she stood as a voice of quiet strength among her people. Rian walked past her on his way to the command post. She looked up at him. "Will they come soon?" she asked. He answered without stopping. "Yes. Be ready." The night passed into early dawn. A soft gray light spread across the sky. For a short moment, everything was silent. Birds circled above the city. The air was still. Then the silence broke. The Drackle horns echoed from the south. Their war machines advanced in long, dark lines. Walkers with glowing red eyes stomped through the ruins. Troop carriers followed behind, carrying thousands of soldiers. Above them, enemy aircraft moved in formation, their engines rumbling like thunder. The defenders tightened their grips on their weapons. The air seemed to hold its breath. Rian stepped to the front of the defense line. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "They think they can crush us," he said. "They think we will fall like every world they have taken. But they are wrong. This city stands, this line stands, and we will not move." The soldiers answered with a roar. The Leorin fighters shouted with them. The fear in their hearts was still there, but it was buried under something stronger. The first wave of Drackle troops hit the shield wall like a storm. Explosions flashed against the barriers. Energy bolts cut through the air. The ground shook under the weight of their walkers. Lena shouted orders to her unit. "Left flank. Hold position. Do not let them break through. Rian fired his weapon from the front, striking at the lead walkers. His aim was precise and calm. Each shot hit where it mattered most. Around him, human soldiers and Leoran fighters fired together, creating a storm of light and sound. Laren worked behind the lines, pulling wounded fighters to safety. She did not think of fear anymore. She only thought of keeping them alive. Renat directed supply teams from the command center. Every crate, every energy cell, every piece of equipment reached the fighters on time. His voice echoed through the comm units, steady and firm. Above the battlefield, the Vanguard fleet moved into final position. Admiral Kara watched the enemy carriers on her display. They were massive, but they were not unstoppable. She turned to her officers. Prepare the main strike. The fleet spread its formation. Giant cannons began to glow as they charged. On the ground, the defenders faced wave after wave. The shield wall began to flicker from the strain, but it did not collapse. The Drackle tried to push through the left flank, but Lena led her unit into the chaos. She moved with speed and skill, striking at the enemy weak points. A walker exploded under concentrated fire, sending a shockwave across the battlefield. The Drackle responded with even more troops. Their commander was determined to crush this resistance. They had never faced such stubborn defenders on a conquered world before. Rian climbed onto a damaged vehicle to get a clear view. He raised his voice again. They will not take this ground. Not while we breathe. The soldiers around him shouted back. They were exhausted, but they refused to yield. Then the sky changed. A sharp beam of light cut through the clouds. The Vanguard fleet opened fire. Giant streaks of energy rained down on the Drackle carriers in orbit, one by one. The enemy ships were struck. Admiral Kara watched as the first carrier cracked under the force of the bombardment. Target locked. Fire again, she ordered. A second blast followed. The Drackle carriers began to lose formation. Their aircraft on the ground faltered. Renat received the signal at the command center. His eyes widened. The fleet is hitting them. They are losing their control. Rian smiled faintly for the first time in days. Then we push, gave the order for a counterattack. Human and Leoran forces surged forward like a rising wave. They moved through smoke and rubble, firing with everything they had. Lena led the left flank forward. Darrow and his squad struck at the enemy walkers. Explosions filled the streets as machines fell one after another. The Drackle troops began to pull back. Their leader shouted commands, but their formation broke under the pressure. Above them, their ships burned. Laren stood among the wounded, watching the sky light up with fire. She saw the faces of the soldiers who had refused to fall. She felt tears in her eyes, but they were not from fear. Renat left the command center and joined Rian on the front line. Together, they watched the enemy retreat. They are falling back, Renat said, with disbelief in his voice. Rian's voice was quiet but strong. They came for a weak world. They found Earth instead. The defenders pushed forward until the last of the Drackle forces were forced beyond the city's border. The enemy ships, damaged and burning, began to retreat from orbit. Admiral Kara gave the final order. Do not chase. Let them carry the memory of this day with them. The roar of the battlefield slowly faded. The fires still burned, but the sound of enemy engines grew distant. The line had held. The city was still standing. Soldiers lowered their weapons and looked at one another. Many of them fell to their knees from exhaustion. Some laughed weakly. Some cried in silence. Lena leaned against a broken wall and breathed hard. We did it, she whispered. Rian walked through the ruined streets. The people of Leora came out from their shelters. Children looked at the human soldiers with wide eyes. Farmers and miners who had once bowed to the Drackle now stood with pride. Renat stepped forward and raised his hand to the crowd. They came to destroy us. But we are still here. Because Earth stood with us. The crowd erupted with cheers. Leoran and human soldiers stood side by side. There were no ranks in that moment. Only survivors who had become something more. Laren walked up to Rian. Her hands were still covered in dust, and her uniform was torn, but she smiled. "We are free," she said. Rian looked around at the people, the soldiers, the smoke rising from the battlefield, and the sky that was slowly clearing. "Yes," he said. "You are free," Admiral Kara sent a message from orbit. Her voice echoed through the city speakers. "To the people of Leora," she said, "today you stood with Earth. Today you fought not as victims, but as warriors." The Drackle will remember this day. Soldiers began to rebuild their camps. Medics treated the wounded. Engineers cleared the ruins. The war had left scars, but the spirit of the people had grown stronger than anyone expected. Rian stood at the edge of the broken bridge, a symbol of their stand. The water below carried pieces of enemy machines downstream. He felt the wind on his face. Lena joined him. "Do you think they will return?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Maybe. But when they do, they will remember this place, and they will know that Earth does not give mercy to those who bring war." The sun rose fully over the city. Golden light touched the walls and the faces of the tired defenders. For the first time in many days, the air was quiet. Laren held the hand of a small child who had survived the siege. She looked at the horizon and whispered softly, "We are not weak anymore." Rian turned and walked back toward his soldiers. They had come as warriors, and they would leave as legends. The story of Leora would spread across the stars. Other worlds would hear of it. And when the Drackle came again to another place, they would remember this day. They would remember that Earth stood like a wall of fire,